My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Andy Fortgang. It's June 11th, 2024. We're at Flor Wines in Portland. And Andy, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for being here.
First question is, why wine?
You know, I don't know if there's a straight why. You know, I would say not so much wine chose me. Wine's, you know, or a career in wine sort of found me, which directly came out of the early part of my career in restaurants. I had a position in wine sort of foisted upon me. An interest prior to that, just sort of as part of restaurant stuff, but just this whole opportunity kind of put on my shoulders that I wasn't expecting, and then that kind of became the jumping off point for everything else from there.
Let's talk about life a little bit before wine then.
Sure.
Tell us where you're born and raised and early
I was
life.
born in New York, in Manhattan. Grew up there, and Upper West Side Manhattan. My dad was born and lived his whole life in the same neighborhood except for a couple of years of college. So in my mind, sort of the idea of moving to Oregon for the first 20-something years of my life, or almost 30 years of my life, didn't really exist. The idea of living anywhere else kind of wasn't really a thought. It's, might be one of the biggest cities in the world, but it can be very provincial. And the idea of, I never thought I'd live anywhere else when I was growing up, or even when I was in college or after. But when I was in high school, I kind of found an affinity for cooking. Something I can thank my mom for. I don't remember what it was, but there was something she was making for dinner, and I said, "Can you make spaghetti with sausages instead?" And she said in very flowery, or not very flowery language, "If you don't like what I'm cooking, you can cook your own fucking dinner." And so I went in the kitchen and started playing around, and I did, and I really kind of enjoyed the process. And I just found myself watching cooking shows and trying to cook different things at home. Soon after that, I'd come home from school, and there was there wasn't as many cooking shows on now. I think the Food Channel was maybe just starting out. But the Discovery Channel, it wasn't like Housewives then. It was actual educational shows and history and cooking shows, which they seem to always put on in the afternoon, like Great Chefs, Great Cities, and all these sort of things. And the beginning of the Cooking Channel, I think, was then on with Emeril and David Rosengarten and Mario Batali and all those people, kind of the first of the TV people. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so I was just kind of trying to learn everything I could about cooking at home, and kind of just a bunch of lucky happenstance, and kind of a real lucky thing of a whole bunch of people following through on something. My mom was at work and talking to some other people, making small talk, and this becomes applicable later on when we get to how I got into wine, or began working solely in wine, or mostly in wine. Just making small talk. What are your kids? My kid really likes to cook. And this woman, who none of us can remember who she is, not someone my mom knew well, no one I ever met, said, "Well, my friend's brother is the chef of a restaurant. Maybe I can ask my friends to ask his brother if your son can go in and spend some time in his restaurant." Now, people say polite things to each other all the time, but this woman actually asked her friend, and this is the mid-90s, so it's not, everyone didn't have a cell phone in their pocket, asked her friend, with handing over the phone number, our home phone number that my mom had given her, to her friend, and he gave it to his brother, maybe not the actual piece of paper, but actually called and shared the number. And then it was 2 or 3 weeks later, the phone rings in our apartment, and it's Tom Colicchio of Gramercy Tavern on the other end of the phone. I talked to him, nice guy. He's like, hey, you want to come in? And everyone who's ever worked for him has an impression. You want to come in and, spend a little time in the kitchen? I was like, yeah, sure, yeah, why not? And I got off the phone and, my mom asked me about it and she kind of had an idea. And I said, yeah, it's cool, but like, I'm kind of interested in like fancy cooking and like Gramercy Tavern sounds like a bar. And it had been open for maybe a year or two at that point. I think just a year because it's probably 95 at this point. And then I went in and I think my parents thought that I'd go in and see how much hard work a kitchen was and I'd run away screaming. And I was just hooked. I'd be there on weekends, school breaks, holidays. And this was probably in the fall of my junior year in high school, I think. They offered me a summer job. And then I kind of worked there summers and holidays in the kitchen, working the different stations in the kitchen. Then I went off to Cornell University, the School of Hotel Administration. I think it has a slightly different name now, but and the hospitality college there. And started there in the fall of '97. And then, summer breaks, come back to the city, worked at a couple other restaurants. In the kitchen only. And then it was the summer between my junior and senior year. I said, I was talking to Tom. I said, hey, if I'm gonna be a chef, it'd probably be good to like spend some time in the front of house. And so I did an internship with one of the managers at Gramercy in the front of house. Just kind of realized I sort of fell for that. Love the interaction with like guests, just the myriad of different tiny little things that go on in a restaurant, the, surprises and challenges and, from reservations to plumbing issues, all the little different things you have to like fix and keep going. It was like very exciting, especially as, a 20 or 21 year old. Now all those things are headaches. Then it was exciting because at the end of the day I helped to fix them, but it wasn't really my problem. Really loved that. And then I went back to school, and then that winter break, I remember during winter break I went back and I was cooking on the line there. And this guy named Marco Canora, who's now has had his own restaurant and other projects instead, but then was a sous chef there. And he'd known me for years at that point, and he looked at me, he's like, you're done in the kitchen. And at first I was kind of offended, but then we talked afterwards. He's like, no, you don't have the same passion, that's not what and he was right. And so after college I ended up taking a job as a manager at Gramercy. And was there for a couple of years and then decided I had to go out in the world. I feel like I'd been this like safe place of Gramercy Tavern for most of my life. I was gonna work at Per Se, the Thomas Keller restaurant. Got hired to do that and then unhired to do that all before it opened. Which at the time was really upsetting, but it actually set the path for a lot of things, like everything in life does, had I gone that path, I probably would have ended up with my wife, but the point was, so I at that point, I'd already quit my job, gone on a vacation, come back, was planning to start work, found out I wasn't going to start work. So I gave Tom a call, and I was like, because I also knew he'd want to know. And I was like, hey, this happened, and he's like, what the fuck, So he was like, well, we're short a manager at Kraft. It was his other restaurant at the time. There's still other restaurant. He said, why don't you come on? No obligation. You stay as short as long as you want, but you'll have a job, and then you can look for something, not be in a rush. And so I was doing that. I was working there, kind of interviewing, trying to find the next right thing. found a cool position, was offered the position, and I came in to him and Katie, who's director of operations, and said, I'm ready to go. I found another job. And they said, don't go. I said, why? What do you mean don't go? And they're like, well, the guy who's the wine director, it's not really working out. And so we want you to take that job. And I'd been, the whole time I'd been, at Gramercy, I'd been, as a manager for a couple of years, been like working with wine, helping people with wine. We didn't have kind of a set of sommeliers there. Wine program was led by Paul Greco, who would definitely be, as far as, I guess we have to circle back to that, a mentor. If I truly had a mentor in wine, it would be Paul. If not from kind of like direct, classic mentoring, the way people kind of think about it, and like with the whole somm quartermaster phenomena, that's not the world we were all in. But really in just kind of thinking about wine and people, frankly, when it comes to Paul, just being open about it, being open-minded about it, looking at things critically. And when I say critically, I don't mean like good or bad, but thoughtfully. I definitely want to get back to that, but I don't want to lose the train of thought on this narrative. But the point was there was no like group of sommeliers, so everyone was very active in selling wine. And certainly because I was a manager at Gramercy in a suit, as opposed to being in a waiter's uniform, so there were a lot of guests who wanted to talk to me about wine more than, let's say, their captain, some of whom definitely knew more about wine than I did, had just been in the business longer, just because, it was that whole suit thing. So I'd been working wine, and when I started at Craft, I kind of was the manager, but sort of assistant wine director. Really meant that I was doing all the mechanics and the grunt work of making it happen. So I said, I'm going to leave, and they said, don't leave. We're gonna part ways with the wine director. The beverage, it wasn't wine director, it was beverage director, it was everything. We want you to take that job. And I said, oh, okay. I said, I'm flattered, but I already took this other job. And they said, no, don't feel bad. Like when did you take it? I said, like yesterday. And it's like, we know them. We'll call him. It won't look bad on you. So, but the difference was that was like a small little restaurant in Tribeca, and this was running the wine program of like a big 3-star restaurant, 3 New York Times star restaurant that, now still does well and is still well known. But you go back to 2004, and it was one of the real, I'm not trying to take away from it now, but it was 2 or 3 years old. It was one of the places. So it was a huge opportunity, and I sort of said, I was like, hey guys, like I feel as though like might be a little bit, I might not be fully qualified. There's a ton of people who have been working this a lot longer who are probably better qualified. And Tom said, he's like, I trust your palate. I trust you. And I know you'll always do the job and work like you own the place. Which when I think about it, I really kind of I couldn't have had a bigger compliment, though I didn't really absorb that at the time. And that's still something I tell people all the time. If you want to get ahead in whatever you do, act like you own the place. Not to say that you will, but that's what's going to show. Just means put everything into everything. Doesn't work out, you can leave. If you don't own it. But that's, but act like, I tell every manager or serious restaurant person that works for us, you want to move up, act like you own the place, That's, it doesn't mean walk around with your chest puffed out and bossing people around, but just, put 100% in. And then just also the idea of trust, and obviously palate-wise, he knew my palate and I knew his from really growing up cooking his food. So that's really what got me into it, because there I find myself, being a wine buyer for one of the heavyweights. In New York, I was 25 at the time. And it was great. And I made amazing relationships with so many of the wine reps because I was so much more open-minded and less, kind of less jaded, and than other people, because I went from not meeting with wine reps and tasting and be sold to like doing it with all like the top salesmen and all the distributors, and it was great. And and that's where I think a lot of what I learned from Paul really came into play, which was really taking each wine for what it was put in front of me. At the end of the day, like, did it taste good or did it not taste good? The story's important, and I think wine's pretty boring without a story. You know what I mean? Like, it could be like the most, people like to taste wine blind, and I think that's fun and that's interesting as an activity. But I think to really enjoy wine, it's like you have to really enjoy it, I want to know where it's from. I appreciate the idea of judging it objectively, but if something tastes great, but it tastes like it's from Tasmania, but it's or something tastes great, but it tastes like it's, I don't know, Syrah from South Africa, and then it's really Pinot Noir from Dundee Hills, like, it doesn't taste that good anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like, objectively, it might taste, doesn't change how it tastes, but like, it's just wrong. And I think that's something I really learned from Paul, just being honest about it, and like that, being open-minded to new things also, was, back then, I was just talking earlier how kind of like, people kind of yawn when they hear about Gruner Veltliner, but you go back to the, late 90s, early 2000s, and it was like that was no one knew what that was, and like we had a whole page of them, on the list at Gramercy, and we're selling Riesling out the wazoo at Gramercy and then at Craft, like that. That just came from like being open-minded and taking things critically for what they are, not just what was, the hip wine or the in-style wine or, the wine that was supposed to be cool. And so that's really how wine became kind of a central thing. It never stopped being about restaurants, because I was still managing, like I was one of the managers at Crafts, and I was the beverage director and wine director there, and helped with a few of the other restaurants that they were opening, because that was kind of an expansion period for them. And then it's probably, I met my wife I met her in 2003, I want to say, but we didn't date or anything for a couple years after that. Since this is for posterity, and she'll listen to this one time and be embarrassed, but I was manager at Craft. She was the assistant pastry chef. I'm sorry, at Gramercy Tavern. She was assistant pastry chef at Craft. She was coming in with a girlfriend to come to dinner at Gramercy. She walked into the restaurant in a black dress with purple polka dots, and I said, I'm going to marry that woman, to myself. And we had a lot of friends in common who kept us apart because we were both dating other people. And a couple years later, we found ourselves single, and ended up together, but that never would have happened if that per se job had happened. So everything that's the biggest thing I always think about when things go wrong, is that you don't really know what would happen after that if things went right, whatever right was in your mind. So I always lived in one place, just in the city. She grew up moving all over the place, and she moved to New York when she was 19 or 20 to do pastry. And she sort of put the idea in my head that you could live other places, which was like, okay. And we started to talk about it here and there, and it just was kind of like inception, kind of like started, there are probably some like hot days where I was getting off the subway in my tie and suit, sweating like a dog, being like, maybe we should leave. And it was kind of a wine thing that kind of pushed me over the edge. I love New Yorkers. I'm a New Yorker at heart. But the thing that kind of frustrated me, people always say is like, oh, it's because like there's like the rich Wall Street guys and they're jerks, and it's like, no, or there's like the really difficult like Park Avenue ladies and they're like mean. It's like, no, it's like people that are jerks or mean like don't really bother me. It's kind of like it's easy. Like if someone's being a jerk, like they're easy to dismiss, at least for me. It's like, okay, you're a jerk. That's I don't have to live with you. I don't have to have dinner with you. I always tell servers in our restaurants, when there's a really difficult guest, I say like, hey, you're like, the natural reflex is to stay away from that table and to like not give them extra service. Well, there's two people at that table. One of them's an asshole. So like, why don't you give like extra good service to that table so that other person that has to live with that person for their whole life can have like a little bit of better time for the next 2 hours. Like make that the win. So difficult people don't bother me, but what started to bother me, and I didn't realize it at the time, but this one event really crystallized it, and then upon reflection, was that I just kind of got annoyed about like, at that time at Craft, working so hard to like find and source the best wines. The whole concept of the restaurant was finding the absolute best products, cooking them simply, presenting them really simply and unadorned, which does not sound that remarkable now, but 20 years ago, on like that fine dining level, that was a new thing. And that we're doing all that, and like for all the guests that were like, it's awesome, we're like, thank you, and like it's no one's job to make us, if you're giving hospitality work in a restaurant, like it's your job to make people feel good. It's not their job to turn around. But what really just got under my skin was, asking people how it was. How was everything? It was good. That's fine. It's like, you're having this amazing stuff. Like, how can you have no bigger emotion than like, well, it's Tuesday, I don't know, it's just sea bass. It started to really bother me. And what kind of solidified it for me was we had a bunch of wines on the list from a winery, Torbreck. Barossa Winery, great stuff. The wines came in a whole kind of array of tiers. But on the upper tier, there were a lot of like really nice, really expensive, like $400, $500, $700 bottles back then, Syrah and Grenache. I remember we had like a few of them on the wine list, but we had a few that were not on the wine list, just, in the cellar, as is, often the case. And there was a table and they were asking about them, and I said, oh, I was trying to do something nice. I said, also in addition, we also have, in addition to the Stru, we also have like the I have to think about when I throw out a vintage, because I don't remember the vintage. It was that long ago. We also have the 01 run rig in the cellar. The guy was like, okay, I'll consider that. I was like, oh, it's the same price. And then he calls me over, and he had been looking at it on his BlackBerry. He's like, why did you offer me that wine? And I said, well, you were interested in the wines from this winery. I want to give you another option. He said, well, I just looked it up, and the wine, two wines on the list, one's a 97, one's a 95, and the wine you offered me is a 94. And I said, I was not aware of that. Like, I don't really follow that, but okay. And he goes, so it's not as good a wine? I said, well, I wouldn't say that. And he goes, well, you can't deny that that's a quantitative measure of its quality. And I said, nope, I cannot deny that it's a quantitative measure of its quality. So I suppose you would like one of these other ones on the page. And I got home that night and I said, Lauren, I am ready to go. So again, like this guy, I don't even remember his face, but like he changed. He brought me to Oregon. So at that point I knew we were ready to go, and we thought about moving to a lot of places. We thought about San Francisco, which had a lot of things like we loved, a little kind of more chill, more kind of a little closer to the produce and the farms and the wineries. A little bit easier to like get out into nature and go for a hike and feel removed. But then realized that also had a lot of like the problems with New York, mainly money in the restaurant salaries. We thought about actually moving out to like farm country in Long Island. We thought about a bunch of different places, but really ended up in Portland because it checked a lot of the boxes. Great, exciting food scene. Obviously, the Willamette Valley right there. And able to just, you don't even have to leave Portland. You can be, out in, Washington Park, or Forest Park, and, feel like you're out in the middle of nowhere. So that's kind of what we set our hearts on. We got married in February of 2007. We moved here in August of that year. I can't remember at what point we really like dove into kind of the preparations and trying to make it happen. At that time we didn't really know anyone here. There's winemakers, that I'd met when they're, coming to New York to show their wares. I'm sure that I met a number of them, but the one that we kind of had the most relationship with before moving out was Brian O'Donnell from Belpont, and him and Jill were kind of like a bit of our welcome wagon moving out here. I remember too, like right before we moved, it was one of my last nights working, and there was actually a group of a table, and I was talking to them of guests at Craft, and they were from Oregon, and I was talking to them, and so I think they corrected me before I got out here. I forget. I think I referred to it as the Willamette Valley, or what? I can't even say it the wrong way anymore. Because, you know what I mean? They're like, Willamette, damn it. I was like, okay, I'll never get that wrong again. So that was helpful, coincidental preparation. So my wife and I decided that once one of us had a job, we would move. And we kind of we're going to start applying for things. I flew out here to interview with Bruce Carey back when they had 4 or 5 restaurants going. About taking a job with them. And on the last, I kind of flew out here on a Thursday or Friday, I don't remember exactly, and I was kind of interviewing with Bruce and Joe and visited all the restaurants, over the course of Friday and Saturday. And my wife came out, I think a day after I did, and then on Sunday, I just remember we went to dinner. And I remember asking Bruce, like, anywhere we should check out for dinner, and he's like, there's this new restaurant, Le Pigeon, everyone's talking about. I haven't been there yet. And I was like, oh, really? And so we went, and it just kind of like, food blew my mind. The energy, all that stuff. And so we had dinner there, went to the airport, red-eye back to New York. Next day, I was at work. Keep in mind, I was like 27 or 28, so the red eye to work was not a big deal. At my desk, kind of scrolling on the computer, looking at Craigslist, because that's where you found jobs back then. It's on Craigslist.
We barely had the internet in those days.
Barely had the internet. And there's a posting for Le Pigeon. They were looking for a manager. And, I applied, and Gabriel and I talked on the phone. I think Le Pigeon had been open just under a year at that point. And, he was like, yeah, we'd love for you to come on. And I was like, and I was trying to decide, like, do I go work for this restaurant group? It's kind of been the direction of my career. They've got like 5 restaurants, or do I 1,000 square foot space on East Burnside? That was really, really exciting to me. And ultimately, it was like, well, I'm not uprooting my whole life and moving across the country to do like the safest choice. So I went with Pigeon. Gabriel and I spent the next 6 months. He thought every day that I was going to quit and not show up because the place wasn't fancy enough or he wasn't professional enough. And I thought he was going to ask me to leave because I was too serious and like not cool enough. Which we've talked about that now. That was 17 years ago. About a year later, a year after being there, I purchased ownership stake in it as well, which made us partners. And a lot of fun in those days, a lot of partying. It was just really exciting. We were having a lot of fun with different wines. The menu was great. People were clamoring to get in. It was just, and I think what made it so successful was like it wasn't like saying like we're all working hard, but like it was really fun, And it's like when people are having fun in anything, music, restaurants, whatever, it's like you just want to be around that. So why wouldn't you go to dinner there? Why wouldn't you go to brunch there? Like you can't fake that energy. You can't like design that in, no architect or designer can, build that into a space. Like that's about people. And then let's see. So we started planning for Little Bird opened December 2010. So we obviously started planning a year and a half or a year before that to make that happen. And for a long time, it was those 2 restaurants. Little Bird opened December 2010, ultimately closed in the end of October of 2019, about a 9-year run. Really boring reasons for closing, just numbers, numbers didn't add up anymore. In retrospect, it was great timing because a few months later, the pandemic happened, and and then like a year and a half before that, we opened Canard in 2018. But I think kind of like for me, I think that's kind of in a way would be kind of like the most defining time of my life. What those years that Little Bird was open, really because it was the time that Le Pigeon was exciting. Little Bird was its own kind of more classic French thing. But it's like in that time, like, and through that whole time, people were like, why don't you open more restaurants? And it's like, we were just busy, and I don't mean like we're busy with work, but like when Little Bird opened, there's Gabriel and me and like my wife. She was working at the restaurants too. She said when she first moved here, she was a pastry chef at Paley's Place. And then she came over and was a pastry chef at Little Bird, then Le Pigeon and Little Bird. But when Little Bird opened, I didn't have kids and Gabriel didn't have kids. And by the time Little Bird closed, I had 2 and he had 3. So that's like really the time. It's like that's, we've always been the mind of like, we're not, some people could say it and maybe I believe them, but like we want to be successful, we want to be comfortable, but neither one of us ever said like taking over the world, or being, multimillionaires is like the goal of this thing. Like, the goal is to be comfortable and take care of our families and provide a great place for, people to work for as long as they want to be with us and hopefully help build their futures. Like that was that time, that was those 8 years. And it was great in that, in that regard. 2018, we opened Canard next door to Pigeon, and that's a space. We kind of had wanted to do something in that space. And I remember it had been for a long time. It was a waxing place. I forget, Wax On or Urban Wax, or one of those kind of things. And then it closed, and we were like, oh, maybe we should try to take it to do a wine bar, or do another restaurant in that space. And we didn't. Really goes back to what I was saying. Is like we were in that time where we were busy with our families, we were busy with the restaurants. Also in that time, Gabriel got sober. And these are all like big things, and we just said, you know what, it's the right space for another restaurant. We have a great idea for another one. It's not the right time. And then a steampunk clothing boutique opened in that space, and we said, great, we have about 18 months to figure out, if we're really going to do this other restaurant and start lining up plans and money, because like it's not going to be here that much longer than that. And about a year, 18 months later, the space became available, and we started to build out Canard. And the idea with Canard was always, really from it started with the idea of a wine bar, but really more a wine bar in the way it's looked at in Europe, particularly in Paris. Where there are places to eat. It's not like, I think a lot of time the conception of wine bar in America is really more bar than restaurant. It's like, you get some, a flight of wines, possibly in one of those like stupid fucking like contraptions that is just, I don't know how you have that in front of you without feeling kind of foolish, but it's just me. And like charcuterie and cheese plate and like it's the same like everywhere. It's like that works in a tasting room, but you don't need it at a wine bar. But really a place that like it's wine. You got to eat with it. The idea is food. So you got to have real food, cooked food, interesting food. Food that was going to be fun and playful, which is just sort of the kind of food that Gabriel cooks and makes anyway. And then just to have like a wine list that was just like absurdly big for a 1,200 square foot space. Success on that, at least having a wine list that's way bigger than it has any reason to be. That's how, and that was like a ton of fun from the get-go, when it opened. Also, like we were open from 8 a.m. to midnight every day, pre-pandemic world. Obviously busier for brunches, kind of like quiet, but like simple, fun breakfast, simple stuff, and then lunch, and people could be there in the middle of the afternoon, have a drink, small menu, and then dinner time till late, and it was great. It was just, it is still great. It's just different, Just that all day thing, It was neat. Pandemic, super fun. Not gonna go step by step through all those years, other to say that like, we hustled and did so many different like to-go things in stores and like live cooking and classes and just 1,000 things, and like it was such for me, just scary, stressful, angstful time that I honestly don't like consciously remember all of it. Like people will say to me like, oh, remember you guys did this like frozen duck lasagnas? I'm like, no, and they think, oh yeah, we did, and just the other day, like one of the wine importers was like, oh yeah, you guys sold so much of that Chianti. I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, you did it, with the to-go. Oh yeah. Remember you guys did like the restaurant in the Jupiter Hotel. Yeah, it's like all these things, but kind of forget about it. And kind of like it's why people have like, more than one kid, like, the brain makes you forget like the diapers and the middle of the night stuff. And so like you do it again, then you go, oh shit, I forgot about this terrible part. So anyway, so the pandemic ended, and out of the pandemic, that's kind of where this place came from. I apologize, anyone viewing this, you're not seeing the beautiful shop down there, but it's open, so we're up here in the upstairs. But we were selling a lot of wine retail through the restaurants, and it kind of, it dawned on me like we should keep doing this, but more the thought was, part of me was like, we might never have restaurants again. People will drink. And so started playing around the idea of like, well, we can keep selling wine to people, for their homes. And one thing I've learned over the years is that you can't do everything yourself, and the more you try to do, the fewer things you're going to do well. And like I knew right away who to call, which is Sergio Lycia. I can hear his voice behind me. He'd been the general manager for us at Little Bird, and I remember meeting him years before. Just he came into dinner at Le Pigeon with his family. I don't remember what year, and he brought a couple cool bottles of Barolo, and I just remember like, who's that cat? And then just, got to know him around town in just wine circles. And then reached out to him and was like, hey, you wanna start a wine business together? And it started with the idea of we're doing all these kind of like curated packs. And it's like, okay, well, we should do that. And then it's like, well, then we should have like, we should get a space, where we could put those together, but where people can pick them up, make it just like a small little like hangout area to try a couple wines when they're doing it. And it's like, well, we should have some shelves there so people can pick up another bottle or two. And then, it just kind of morphed into like a full-on store. And then, even how that looked, we were meeting with a designer, kind of an architect to do the store, a woman named Andy Hess. Her company's Osmos. They're amazing. And we're giving her ideas. And really what I was saying is, we just wanted to not be a boring looking, not just like shelves. Like we just want it to be a place that like you want to spend time in. And then she, her and McCrae, her number two, kind of put together plans and like a visual model, and showed it to us. And I just remember thinking like, oh shit, like this is way nicer than I thought. It's going to cost a ton of money, and I can't not unsee it because we've already seen it. And so we made it happen. And I think it's like, it's beautiful. And people love to come in and hang out. It looks good. More time people spend in the store, more likely they're going to buy something, I would think. That's not always the case. Some people just like to come in, walk around, ask a bazillion questions, and then leave. I don't know. I think it's like an activity. Yeah, and we opened here in a couple days before Thanksgiving of 2021.
I want to back up to something you talked about early on, very, very first kitchen experience. You said you were hooked pretty quickly. We hear that a lot from winemakers and people getting into that part of the industry. I'm curious about from the cooking side, the kitchen side. What hooked you? What was exciting? What made you want to keep coming back?
Gosh, I mean, there's just something kind of, both magical and pretty grounded about cooking. It's all rules, or I should say, not rules, like you think about them like you do this or you're not allowed to do that, but like rules like food and heat and cold and friction and all those, those are kind of rules of physics and science and, thermodynamics, and it's just kind of neat as you learn them and you see how they're attributable to like different ingredients and, but then also just how putting them together, I think cooking, it's what I enjoy about it now, and I very much enjoy, cooking to this day, albeit not professionally anymore, is there's just something where it demands your focus, but in a kind of a loose way. It demands your focus. It's never exactly the same. And I like to eat, so like if you're cooking, like you get to eat what you want, that how, you want to put time in it, put time in it. You want spicier, spicier, but to me, it's very calming, and I think, and I think even in a restaurant, like obviously restaurant cooking is like stressful in the sense of it's a restaurant, but working in the front of house is stressful mainly, but that's just about the clock, right? Cooking itself isn't stressful. It's like the clock is stressful, right? Like serving people in a restaurant isn't stressful. The time limits that you're on are stressful, right? It's like if it takes too long for them to get greeted, like that's a problem. Mm-hmm. It's not greeting them that's the problem, it's time. If there's too long between their two courses, like, the problem isn't that they got their first and second course, it's that it was too long in the middle. The problem with that it was too long in the middle is that there's a reservation after them, that those people are going to be on time. So the stress, time in life, time is the stress. Maybe money too. But, I think mostly time. So like, for me to spend time cooking and not be in a restaurant, all that said, there's definitely plenty of like Sundays where I'm just feeling like $1 million, just like cooking something that's more complicated than it needs to be for the family. My wife's like, it's 7:00. Like, how long till we eat? Kids have school tomorrow, and then all of a sudden it's like boom, right back in the restaurant. I'm like, throwing stuff in the, and the zen is gone.
You mentioned earlier you were talking about kind of learning from Paul Greco about sort of thoughtful and you wanted to continue in that path. So I'm curious about intentionality, thoughtfulness. It's again something we hear a lot in the wine world. Tell me about, from a food and hospitality perspective, what that meant for you.
Well, I like the word, intentionality. I think that's key. I would say, I felt like where the question was going and where the question ended. But, I will just say in terms of like kind of what's the big thing I learned from Paul when it comes to, and I think it's really applicable, with wine is, to like or not something for the quality that it is or isn't. Something that I learned from him that we follow is, we don't, and this goes back to hospitality, it's like we don't focus on small growers because we don't like big growers. You know what I'm saying? But it's hospitality, right? So like if if you come into our restaurant and you say like, and someone sits down, and they're like, hey, do you have cake bread Chardonnay, or do you have? This is an Oregon thing, so I'm not going to do the Oregon equivalent because I'm not going to make any negative things. But if someone says, hey, like, do you have cake bread Chardonnay? And we say, yeah, absolutely. Here you go. What a missed opportunity. Complete missed opportunity. We've added nothing. We turned that wine into a vodka soda, right? Like we lost every opportunity to add something for the guest. So like, we won't ever not, I will use local, like Elk Cove, right? Great wine, been around a long time. Like, if you look at their total production for the Lone Valley, it's pretty big, but like, still happily serve, their Pinots. I don't mean not their other wines, but like, still happily serve their wine because it's great. It doesn't matter that they're bigger than, someone who's, renting a space, in the corner of, like at Day Wines or Carlton Winemaker Studio, we'll still, we won't not have something because it's big, but we don't want to miss an opportunity to have a connection or a conversation with a guest. You know what I mean? In the sense of like, people might, the average drinker isn't going to, I'm just going to continue on this, like, they might know they like Elk Cove, but most wine drinkers, they're not even necessarily separating between like the different vineyards. They're like, oh yeah, we have the Mount Richmond, it's the site, That's an opportunity for us to where we can add something to it. And that's really the key for us, so it's like, for wine, wine is an opportunity to connect with our guests and to like add hospitality to it. Not teaching, not in a pedantic way, but to not do that is a missed hospitality opportunity. And that is something that, I learned from Paul, and I think that's what people think, that he was always a guy that wanted to like find the most esoteric and wacky stuff. It's like, no, he was curious. But it really, it came from the point of, I think, hospitality and wanting to add something new and show people something new, and we had, he's always, the difference is that if you're going to do that, you have to make sure that you do have those wines. That like, if someone does want like a bigger Chardonnay, that like, if our wine list is going to be good, we don't have to have that one that they know. We don't have to have Duckhorn Merlot, but we need to find, I'm just going to pick on California for anything. I'm not going to, it's safer in this context. But we have to have, a medium to full-bodied wine with soft tannins. Like that's our job in crafting a wine list. Like that's where the hospitality is, but it's not wasting an opportunity. If there's one thing I've seen too is like, people get really fixated on big or small, especially with wine, and a lot of things, coffee, it's like, it's a company or a brewer, gets too big, they just start to get hated on. It's like, well, did their quality go down? Because if their quality didn't go down, then why stop buying the wine? Like Breakside IPA tastes as good today as it did 10 years ago, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't like, try out new brewers and new beers, but don't just kick them into the curb, if it's still made, if it's being made with, integrity and the quality's there. And so that's an important piece, and certainly how I try to approach wine and things.
Tell me about building a wine list.
Well, I think any big, quality wine program. I mean, I think for one thing that you get an immediate appreciation for, which is probably part of the reason that I got that position at Kraft because my predecessor didn't, is that there's like two pillars that it all stands on. Like the first is like what's being offered, and that has to have, a great wine list needs to simultaneously kind of have personality, the personality of the restaurant, and to an extent the buyer. But it also, it has to have something for almost everyone. And I say almost because you can't make everybody happy. Then you're not doing the personality part at all. In the sense of like, you need to look at a wine list, and it's not just like, do we have wines in every price point and every style, but like, you need to kind of like break it down and say like, do we have wines low, medium, and high for crisp white, medium white, full white, and as the wine list gets bigger and you have, let's say, more and more sections, you kind of have to hit that individually, Obviously, you're not always going to get, the cheap wine, in the Burgundy section, but you can find it, maybe in the Macon section of the Loire section, But it doesn't, if someone gets excited about seeing that you have a lot of, Northern Rhone Syrah, but there isn't a single wine under $100, like that kind of loses, and frankly, having those couple wines under $100 makes the wines that more than that look a little more worth it. It's like you need a good wine list for each section should have something that is different levels of approachability. I think that's key. That's like about the selection. Maybe it's three. That, the personality of the restaurant, it needs to speak to the food. It needs to make sense for the food. It needs to make sense for the chef, for the wine buyer. So like, there's that. And the third piece, because I guess you need three legs to stand, if you're a chair or stool. See, things I always say that now I can't think about because there's a camera on me. Okay, so the third and probably most important piece of a good wine list. The first should have kind of something for everybody, different kinds of wine, different price points. The second should express the personality of the restaurant and the wine buyer to an extent. And the third, often overlooked, that I could not remember earlier, that is the most important piece, is the organization behind the wine list has to be there. In other words, when someone orders a bottle of wine, that it can be found and brought to the table in short order. Otherwise, a wine list is just words on a page and not really worth the paper that they're printed on either.
Tell me about moving to Portland. Obviously, a big change. What was the restaurant scene like here compared to what you were used to, and what did you sort of bring to? What did you bring with you?
I mean, what I found that was really great was a real genuine kind of sense of camaraderie, genuine, and a real collective sense of kind of, rising with the tide, as they say. I mean, everyone's focus was really on there's enough room for everybody. The better any one of us is, the better we all will be. And learn from each other, we can help from each other, we can assist each other. I mean, at that time too, the whole country was like, what's going on in Portland? It kind of came from like, place that, was like, no one knew what Oregon was. And some people saw my own private Idaho and were like, what? And then there was like the food thing and the wine thing. Or maybe I'm just thinking about people in their 20s. But, and that was really great. I mean, coming from New York, I came from an environment of working with great people that like really cared about each other. And, there was, I think, within the New York restaurant world at the time, like kind of groups of restaurants that kind of supported each other. But there wasn't that same sort of sense of everybody's in it together, which also makes sense. New York is 400 years old. Portland's not. Portland's a lot smaller. The fewer restaurants. So it makes sense in a smaller group. There's going to be that greater sense of kinship. But I was really taken by that. What did I add to it? I know I can say what I added to the Pigeon. I think it would be pompous of me to try to say like, what did I add to? I think I added for there sense of professionalism. Focus on service. Focus on mechanics of a restaurant and the guest. And I think after a number of years, there's been a lot of people that have worked with us there who've taken some of that, and if in some way that's influenced other restaurants in Portland, I'll take the credit or the guilt for that. But I think that's kind of and I think that's one of the strengths of my partnership with Gabriel, is that I was able to bring my experience, my sense of restaurant business and mechanics and kind of professional operation, and add it, or not really add it, or just kind of intertwine it to a more spontaneous, kind of rambunctious, heart-forward approach, I think it's a combination of that, the head and the heart.
Well, tell me about learning wine then having to learn wine at that level, and what was sort of your process for educating yourself, and what did you find exciting about it?
Well, the hardest thing is people always ask me how I learned so much about wine, and if I give the honest answer, it's completely unhelpful to anyone who's ever asked, because I had this amazing opportunity where I had already, I'd been, there'd always been the culture of education. So like when I was at Gramercy in the front of the house, like every day the whole staff would taste a wine. Everyone talked about wine, read about wine, but it was only to that extent. And then we did the same thing at Craft, but it was only when I took control of the wine program that then I was, twice a week for a couple hours each day tasting with wine reps and just, and so people say like, how did you learn about wine? I was like, oh, well, right when I really needed to learn about wine, I would sit down and people would bring the best wines in the world to me for me to taste and decide on. Hundreds, in the course of a month it'd be, in the course of I used to do it in the morning then, but like, let's say 10, 20, I meet 4 or 5 reps, 10 wines each, be 50 wines in a day. That's if I do that, early on I was doing that twice a week, so that's 100 wines, and then there's whatever I just opened or was around throughout the week, so what's that, another 20, that's 120, so that's 120, 240, that's almost 500 wines a week, and that's without me drinking. So like that's not, it's not helpful, but that's the honest answer. It's like I just tasted different things, all different things, and that's how I learned. And it's like unfamiliar to tell people that, because otherwise if you want to, if you're just working, in a restaurant or in a winery and you just want to learn about more wines, it's like, you got to buy that stuff. Like, it's incredibly expensive. I mean, you can go out and thoughtfully buy, like, I want to learn about Sauvignon Blanc, so I'm going to buy a Sancerre, Puy Fumé, and something from New Zealand, something from California, but like, that's a lot of coin, so I had it pretty lucky in that regard, and it's pretty singular. And I've encouraged people who've worked with us at the restaurants, who are kind of helping out in the wine program, I'm like, show up for the tastings. Like, this is the best way to learn, because at the end of the day, it's like you have to, you know, if you want to learn, you got to, you know, read and talk to people and taste with people. But really, it's just like tasting. It's like repetition of tasting. You know, as many kinds of everything as you can taste, and you know, it's great if you don't have to pay for it.
Tell me about what you mentioned, obviously, the kind of formative time for you, the 20 teens, 2 restaurants. What I guess, sort of take us through kind of a week or a month for you, typically for you, while you're running 2 restaurants. What was your role day to day, week to week, and how did you sort of balance the various responsibilities you had?
Well, you know, throughout that time, it changed a little bit, and it probably was, you know, changed to where I'd put focus was kind of based on just like kind of the combination of management we had at whichever restaurant. You know, through all that time, I was really held on to both wine lists. Well, no, through all that time at Le Pigeon, and certainly for the first like 6 or 7 years of Little Bird. You know, and that was really, you know, that was fun for me, you know, to have, because it's kind of like, you know, you taste a wine, you're like, this is a Little Bird wine, this is a Pigeon wine, you know, and a lot of wines can be both, but so is that, you know, a lot of time on the floor. I mean, one of the things that was not positive about that time was that, especially towards the end of it, or really the second half of it, I always felt like I was giving someone the short end of the stick. You know, I was either giving the Pigeon the short end of the stick, or Little Bird the short end of the stick, or my family the short end of the stick. And I, you know, always had it in my head that like I wasn't giving enough of myself to somebody or to something. You know, which in retrospect, maybe is true, maybe isn't. But it was kind of like the glass half empty way of looking at it. I've always been the one to kind of like keep track of the finances, and up until the last few years, like pick the insurance plans, and I'm the guy that deals with the accountant and, you know, and the tax stuff, and, you know, so, you know, and kind of is kind of where the buck stops on, you know, ultimately on front of house or service decisions, or if the buck stops before me, I don't like where the buck stopped, then I move the buck. But that was always the case. But I think really through that time, I mean, it's only really been since the pandemic that I've really been comfortable. I'm not giving the pandemic some like credit, like fuck the pandemic, like it has no love for me. But it's only since then that I've really sort of appreciated limitations, and saying, you know, it's like, if I've done my job right, then like people don't need me when I'm not there. With the exception of my family. I'm not, you know, I'm just to create that like little separation, you know, but at the same time, I've also learned, and it's something that, you know, is one of those things that, you know, my wife laid out for me. And I think for, you know, anyone that is really passionate about what they do, you know, if you're just punching a clock, you know, you're all you when you're home. But if you're like really invested in something or passionate about it, winemaker, you know, restaurant owner, chef, like, you're better off staying a little longer at work than going home and thinking about work with your family. Then you're just wasting everybody's time. You're wasting your own time. You're wasting your family's time. You know, quality time is really what's important. You know, at all those things, and I think, you know, I know your question was like, what made it, you know, in that period of just the 2 restaurants? Well, it's kind of like, it took that time for me to learn that. And so the negative part of that time was me not really understanding that viscerally, You know, I don't mean like up here, but like in here. And that was always kind of the struggle. But like within that struggle, like it was also like the best time, because like it was fun to like shoot across the river and be like, I'm here, like let's do that, and do that. And it was, that's when my family happened, super exciting to, like Little Bird opened in December 2010. My daughter was born in April of 2012 on my birthday. And my son in 2014 in July. So it was just like the most dynamic time in my life. And in that time, going from, to being not a parent and being 30 years old, to having 2 kids and being 40. It's like it's like you went from being like, I'm not going to say, a dumbass to a sage, but like dumbass to a sage. Like, it was great. We did great things then. We had so much fun. I think back on like different wine dinners we had there at both restaurants. Growers from France, growers from the Valley, growers from California. Just a collection of like amazing relationships and regular guests, that built up over that time. I feel like, that's when like things came together. Mm-hmm. Not that everything is like perfect and easy and smooth sailing ever since then, well, not pandemic, but yeah, I think that's why that time was so important.
Tell me about building, running, managing a team in a restaurant. Obviously, you mentioned a dynamic situation, a little stressful, not necessarily usually a lot of turnover. So tell me about that, about your sort of a style for approaching, building, and maintaining a team.
I think it's hard, I don't think there's like a magic formula. I think you have to, I think whatever you're hiring for in hospitality, you have to hire the person, not the resume. And every time I've in my head tried to move around that, or been like, wow, this person just seems so great and they've got all the right answers, but something seems a little bit off. Something's a little bit off. But it's really about having people you can trust, and then getting out of the way. Now, getting out of the way doesn't mean like not paying attention. It doesn't mean not showing up. I feel like a lot of what I do is just double checking things, in terms of like a lot of day-to-day stuff. And some of that I shouldn't do. I can't help it, but I don't need to tell people that, it's really important to like pick the right people, trust them. And, I will say this, there are people who seem like we've had working for us who seem like the right person, and maybe their tenure ended. Sometimes there's their choice, sometimes our choice. And, quite possibly they started really great, and then sometimes it's time for people to move on. But for me, the thing that matters is like when I think about who's in the rest, you know what I mean? If I'm like, oh, I'm a little worried because this person's managing tonight, like that person shouldn't be there. Or it's like, oh, who's like, we have a VIP table coming in, like who's in like station 2, because I don't want that, like, well, that person shouldn't wait on anybody if I don't want them, And so I think, But with management in particular, it's just about like trusting people, giving them the tools. And what I've learned too is I'm getting better at is, and I say better at because it is a weak point for me, is not expecting people to know what I'm thinking. Something that I get really mad at my wife for, and I do at work all the time with other people. And I know that about myself, you know. I'm like, well, this seems so obvious, and I don't want to, like second guess them or, you know, say something that should be obvious. But it's like, no, having someone try to guess what you're thinking, that's an issue. Over communicate. Over communicate. Trust, but over communicate too.
Talk a little about the Oregon wine industry. You mentioned obviously having a familiarity with it before coming here, and having the O'Donnells and a few other people you had met. Tell me about your impressions of Oregon wine prior to coming here, and how you've seen it grow.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really exciting, how it's grown. In the time since 2007 been here, so not 20 years, but getting close. I mean, it's so different to be here than to be 3,000 miles away. I can't put my finger on like how much different like wine buyers really understand about the different AVAs or the different single vineyards. But I think when I was not here was a while ago. So. But then like the single vineyards, they cost more than the Willamette Valley, But being here and being close to it, and also I think the Oregon Wine Board and the Winemaker Association, there's Pinot Camp, and they did a tremendous job of really kind of educating people nationally and internationally about it. So I think there's a greater understanding. But it's been really cool to see since I've been here. It's just fascinating the direction that different wineries, different winemakers, different growers have gone. How some have grown. People who are making their first wines in the mid 2000s, or I remember, I think it was like. The first wines that Ken and Erica made at Walter Scott, and then bring them into us, and now that's a very, well-known thing, It's interesting to think how things have grown, to taste, years ago, Marcus Goodfellow's Matello wines, and, which were always good, and I think early on had this kind of like playful, inquisitive note, and now they're just so like elegant and profound. Meeting Nate Reddy at the Stumptown on 4th Avenue when he was like fresh moving here from like Colorado or California, I forget, and then the next year, like, visiting him at their trailer, to now, 10 years later, like, everything that Hayu is, and, that goes over and over, I mean, it's, to still, like, now, like, walk the vineyards, with Jason Lett, and see, the original Ari vineyard, and, like, and taste the wines that he's making, which are, I mean, look, the Willamette Valley wouldn't be what it is about David, but like, Jason's making the best wines that have ever come from Irie. I mean, the wines are amazing. It's things changing, and generations changing, And I can I don't want to keep going on and on, because if I name too many people that I'm excited about, then I'm going to leave out other people, and I'm going to feel bad. But it's also exciting to see all the different tiny projects, and I've tasted so many of them, and and sometimes I just, a grower, and I know they're putting their heart into it, and we taste with them, and then they walk out, and I just put my head down, what on earth were they thinking? That wine was not good, or that wine was good, but this is your first vintage from purchased grapes and rented space, and you want $50 for that? What kind of chutzpah? Brian O'Donnell, 30-year-old estate vine. I mean, I know it's not buying the grapes, but estate vines, the wholesale is $30, with a history, and you got to build into that, but that's also the thing, someone new, they're, you get to make mistakes, but it's exciting to see. I've seen some of those people come in and taste with us, and I'm just what and then a couple years later they got something better, so it's kind of been, exciting it's just fun to see the changes, and really dynamic. And there's wines that come up that don't make sense to me, but they don't have to. They just have to make sense to enough people for whoever that is to feed themselves. That's what's great. I mean, it's great being here. I love, every summer we go to, I plan a few trips, 5 or 6 different days, different days of the week, and have a mixed bunch of the staff from the restaurants come down, and I love just to see them talking to the winemakers and walking in the vineyards and having those aha moments. Especially a lot of times it's not just front of house, back of house people come down too in those groups, and that's great. And winemakers, it's great for them to see. Those are the people really selling their wine, So yeah, I mean, it just still feels, very dynamic.
So what's next for you? What's on your horizon, personally or professionally?
Personally, my daughter's 12, so I want to survive the next 5 years. What else? I want to beat my son at basketball one time.
Just once?
Yeah. He's 10. I could beat him about a year ago. I can't beat him anymore, and I don't think that's changing for a while. He has a broken arm now, so maybe this is the week. No, honestly, I enjoy traveling, particularly to wine regions. I feel lucky because most of, I like to eat, I like to cook, I like to drink. I like to sit at a table with people I care about. And so my work is all around that. It's I was just in, a couple weeks ago, I was in Austria, with an importer visiting growers there. Someone was like, oh, tough life. I'm like, I picked a good job. I'm not going to apologize for it. So honestly, there's not personally that much I would change. I'd like to carve out a little more time to have more friends over, sit in my backyard and hang out. But other than that, no major goals. Work-wise, love Flor. Want to keep working to see it flourish. Wine, retail. It's different than a restaurant, most people that love wine, they have one shop. Mm-hmm. You can have one favorite shop. You can have 5 favorite restaurants. So You know, it's like, but it's exciting just, you know, as we slowly build those regulars here. Restaurants, I just want to keep, you know, Canard and City and the Pigeon, you know, keep them going another 20 years, you know, maybe another one, probably another one, but we're not in a rush, you know. It's got to be the right thing in the right place at the right time, you know. Those three things.
Last question for you then. What is your greatest achievement? What are you proudest of?
I'm not ashamed of anything I've done. I'd say I'd like to, you know, be more successful at this or that, or win this or do that, but I don't look back and you know what I mean? And I'm not talking about little stuff. I mean, I've done lots of dumb little things I regret, but that's a good question. I feel pretty good about myself having thought about that. But that's true. Like, I don't have any, you know, I'm not ashamed of anything. You know, I hope that's, now that I think about it, you know, I hope that for, yeah, which not for everyone. And small mistakes, I mean, 100%, like, lots of small mistakes. Things that you're ashamed of, like, the next day or a week later, do all those, 100%. But not, like, big major things, you know? Like, be honest, be truthful, you know, and don't have any major things that you're ashamed of. I'm not saying don't, because then it sounds like you did something wrong if you mess that up. But I think that's, if I had to think about what an achievement would be, I think that's the greatest one that I could think of.
Fantastic. Almost like it turned into a graduation speach there almost.
It did.
I love that, yeah. Thank you so much for the time, taking the
Thank
time
you.
to share your story, sharing your space with us, and go ahead and let you off the hook. Thank you.